Welcome to Made, the show about building yourself through grit, failure, and perseverance. My name is Seth, and today we're talking about the power of differentiation. Now, that's a term that's generally used in the business world. A lot of businesses will try to create separation between them and their competitors. But today we're talking about it as a fundamental principle of survival and personal success. So let me ask you a question. What does it take to stand apart in a world that's designed to always pull you toward conformity? How much energy should we expend to maintain our uniqueness in this world? And what's the cost? Is it worth it? These are the questions at the heart of Jeff Bezos' final shareholder letter as Amazon CEO. In 2021, Bezos stepped down from the company that he built from nothing into a trillion-dollar behemoth. But before doing so, he distilled decades of leadership philosophy into a deceptively simple concept. That concept was, differentiation is survival, and the universe wants you to be typical. Now, that's not just fancy shareholder corporate speak. It's a profound insight that applies to individuals as much as it does to organizations. And today, we're going to unpack what that means for you in your life. Now, let's start with something a little unusual for this show, okay? We're going to talk about evolutionary biology. So, in his letter, Bezos references Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, which is a book that explores how natural selection can explain the complex designs of living organisms. Now, you might be wondering what natural selection has to do with building a business like Amazon, or even what it has to do with your personal life. But the connection that Bezos made was kind of genius. In his book, Dawkins explains that living organisms must actively work against merging into their environments. So just think about that for a second. If a warm-blooded animal doesn't keep itself warm, then it'll become as cold as the air around it, meaning in freezing weather, it'll just die. In his letter, Bezos writes, "The world wants you to be typical. In 1,000 ways, it pulls at you. Don't let it happen. You have to pay for the uniqueness, but it's worth it." Now, this is fundamental to understanding excellence, whether we're talking about business, art, athletics, or even personal development. So understand this. Mediocrity is the natural state. Excellence requires constant energy. Just like a warm-blooded animal has to keep using its energy to stay alive in the cold, you have to keep pushing within your environment in order to stay excellent. If you stop putting in the effort, you just don't stay the same, you start to decline. You see, average is the default setting of the universe. Just think about it. On any bell curve, most people cluster into the middle because being normal, it takes no effort. It's what happens when you simply let go and just go with the flow. But standing at the edges of that curve, that's where the resistance comes in. Because excellence demands daily choices that most people aren't willing to make. It requires pushing when others rest, questioning when others accept, and persisting when others quit. The gap between good and great, it's not small, it's massive. And the only way to cross it is by fighting against the drag of comfort and settling. So just think about your own life for a moment. How often have you felt that gentle but persistent pressure to conform, to be normal, to be typical? Maybe it's in how you dress, the career path that you chose, or even how you like to spend your weekends. Society has a remarkable way of nudging us towards the middle, towards what's expected and what's accepted. So why does this happen? Well, I'll tell you. It's because society is fundamentally built to standardize human behavior. The system doesn't want outliers. They're unpredictable. They challenge the norms. They create friction. From the moment we enter school as kids, we're rewarded for following the instructions and penalized for coloring outside the lines. Corporate structures promote those who, quote unquote, fit the culture. Social media algorithms, they amplify conforming voices while burying the truly original voices. even our friends and family, often with the best intentions, they steer us towards the quote-unquote sensible choices. The machinery of normalcy is always working. It's always grinding exceptional edges down to rounded corners that fit neatly into predetermined slots. But here's the truth. The most fulfilled people that I've ever met personally are those who resist this gravitational pull toward sameness. They're the ones who follow their authentic interests even when those interests raise eyebrows. They're the ones who question conventional wisdom and forge their own paths. And yes, they're the ones who often face the most resistance. Here's the thing. Excellence does not happen by accident. All right? It requires deliberate, consistent effort to push against the current, to push against the typical. Just like that warm-blooded animal fighting to maintain its internal temperature, we must constantly expand to preserve what makes us unique. The moment we stop, we begin to drift toward mediocrity. This isn't just philosophical, all right? It's practical. Look at any field of human achievement. The pioneers, the innovators, the game changers, they all share this quality. They maintain their distinctiveness despite enormous pressure to conform. They endure criticism, rejection, and often isolation because they understand something fundamental. Their value lies precisely in what makes them different. Think about the companies that have transformed industries, all right? They didn't succeed by offering slightly better versions of what already existed. They reimagined possibilities entirely. The athletes who changed the game, they didn't just play harder, they played differently. The scientists who revolutionized our understanding didn't merely refine existing theories, they questioned the basic assumptions that everyone took for granted. The cost of being different is real. It requires vigilance against the subtle ways that we're pulled towards the average. It demands the courage to face skepticism and sometimes even ridicule. It means accepting that some people simply won't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. And perhaps the hardest of all, it requires faith in your own vision when the evidence of its value may still be years away. Being different really isn't glamorous, all right? And that's coming from personal experience as well. But in fact, it's the exact opposite of that. Okay, for one, it can be really, really lonely. When you choose a path that others don't understand, you often just walk alone. Relationships can sometimes feel strained when your friends can't relate to your choices. Family members, they worry when you reject conventional security. The financial stress of pursuing your unproven idea, it can keep you up late at night. There's also a very real possibility of failure. All right. For every differentiated approach that succeeds, dozens crash and burn. And I do mean dozens. When you step off the well-trodden path, there is no guarantee that you're going to reach your destination. You might pour years into your vision and ultimately it just doesn't work out. You might sacrifice stability, relationships, even your health, chasing something that remains forever out of reach. And let's just be honest about another hard truth. Sometimes our differentiation, it makes us difficult. All right. I know this from personal experience as well. The same independent thinking that drives innovation can make collaboration really, really challenging. And I don't mean that in just professional settings, but in interpersonal ones as well. The intensity that's required to maintain uniqueness can sometimes blind us to the needs and perspectives of others. And at its worst, the pursuit of differentiation can become ego-driven rather than purpose-driven, leading us into isolation rather than impact. But all that being said, despite these very real, very tough challenges, the alternative to all this, surrendering to the typical, comes with its own devastating cost. And that cost is regret. The quiet ache of knowing that you played it safe. The haunting question of what might have been had you had the courage to pursue your own path. The slow erosion of passion that happens when you conform to expectations rather than honoring your unique gifts. And yes, while being different carries a very big set of risks, it also offers rewards that the typical path just simply can't provide. There's the profound satisfaction of creating something that truly reflects your vision, the deep connections that are formed when others recognize your true and authentic self. There's the exhilaration of breaking new ground rather than retracing old steps. And then perhaps most importantly, there's the knowledge that you're contributing something to the world that only you could have offered. Consider just for a moment the people throughout history who have truly changed our world. Martin Luther King didn't settle for incremental progress when the pressure to do so was immense. Albert Einstein didn't think within the limits of conventional science. He redefined it entirely, despite early rejection. Steve Jobs didn't follow industry norms. He challenged them, even when it made him the outcast. What these individuals share, it's not just talent, okay? It's the courage to stay different when blending in would have been easier. And they paid the price, too. Martin Luther King, as we know, faced imprisonment and was ultimately assassinated. Albert Einstein, he was dismissed and doubted by the scientific community pretty early on. Steve Jobs, he was fired from the very company that he started. But yet, they all kept going. They continued expending the energy required to maintain their distinctiveness in their environments. And because they didn't just succeed personally, they transformed our collective understanding of what's possible. The most powerful question we can ask ourselves isn't, how can I succeed within the existing system, but rather, what unique contribution am I positioned to make that no one else can? Finding that answer requires both deep self-knowledge and the courage to act despite resistance. I want to go back to this idea just for a second of the universe pulling us back to normalcy. Because yes, while hearing about some of the greatest change makers of all time is nice, this principle isn't just true at the highest levels. It plays out in everyday life as well. When you're just starting out any endeavor, whether it's building a business, mastering a craft, or developing a new skill, you might actually stand out unintentionally. You're different because you're still figuring things out. You're still making beginner mistakes, quote unquote, that sometimes lead to fresh insights. But then there's this turning point that comes with competence. As you begin to master the fundamentals, as you start receiving positive feedback and all that stuff, the pull towards convention gets stronger. You learn, quote unquote, the right way to do things. You discover what gets rewarded, and suddenly, the very uniqueness that might have been your greatest strength starts to feel like a liability. I see this all the time in the creative fields, which is my area of expertise, all right? You have artists who begin with a raw, distinctive style, start to gradually smooth out their edges to appeal to a wider audience. You'll see writers who start with bold voices, slowly adopt industry formulas that guarantee decent sales, but they sacrifice the work that made them special in the first place. You have entrepreneurs who launch with revolutionary visions, gradually compromise until their companies become indistinguishable from their competitors. And even take myself. When I first started in the world of photography and videography, my stuff was unhinged. Okay, my shots, my angles, my compositions, my colors, everything was wild. And I liked it. And when I look back at some of my old stuff, I'm like, wow, this looked amazing. Not all of it, but some of it looked really free-flowing. But once I started developing responsibilities and the need to pay bills and all that good stuff, I noticed that I started to conform to the standard, my industry's standard. This pattern is so common because the pressure to conform, it just intensifies over time. The stakes get higher. When you have more to lose, okay, your reputation, your income, relationships, the temptation to play it safe becomes nearly irresistible. Yet, the truly exceptional among us are those who resist this gravitational pull even as they achieve success. They're the ones who keep taking risks even though they could just coast on past achievements. They're the ones who continue questioning assumptions even after they've mastered the rules. They're the ones who remain willing to be misunderstood when understanding would be so much more comfortable. Now, I want to be careful here because there's a fine line between celebrating the costs of differentiation and glamorizing burnout. When Bezos talks about the energy required to remain distinct, he's not necessarily advocating for the 80-hour work week or sacrificing all of your balance in life. Rather, I think he's pointing to the mindset required, the willingness to resist the path of least resistance. Sometimes that might mean working harder than others, but more often it just means working differently, rejecting conventional wisdom, embracing uncertainty, and being comfortable with being misunderstood. Now, I want to shift the conversation ever so slightly and talk about what might be the most important aspect of differentiation. It's the relationship between uniqueness and time. In another shareholder letter, Bezos wrote, "If you're going to do anything new or different at all, there will be setbacks and failures and critics, and well-meaning people will warn you about the risks. If it's something that customers care about, trust your instincts, be stubborn, and be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time." Did you catch that? The important part was be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Most of us live in a world that's optimized for immediate feedback. Social media, it's trained us to expect instant validation. Quarterly business reports, they drive short-term thinking. Even our entertainment comes in increasingly bite-sized formats designed for immediate consumption. But truly differentiated work rarely delivers immediate gratification. The novel approach that changes an industry might look like a mistake for years before it becomes apparent. The artistic innovation that ultimately defines a new movement often faces ridicule when it's first introduced. The personal development choice that transforms your life over decades might look foolish in the moment, okay? This is why extending your time horizon is in itself a form of differentiation. When you're willing to invest in outcomes that might be years or even decades away, you're automatically separating yourself from the majority who optimize for immediate results. The biological metaphor becomes particularly relevant here. Species that perfectly adapt to their immediate environment often struggle when conditions change, like polar bears, whose survival is now threatened as the Arctic melts. But then there are those who maintain diversity and adaptability, like raccoons, okay? Raccoons, love them or hate them, they thrive in cities and forests and everywhere in between. They resist perfect equilibrium with their surroundings and are more likely to thrive in the long run. The same principle applies to our personal and professional lives. Those who optimize solely for current conditions often find themselves vulnerable when the landscape inevitably shifts. But those who maintain their distinctiveness, who continue investing in their unique perspective and abilities, develop resilience that transcends any particular environment. The same applies to our personal and our professional lives. Those who optimize solely for current conditions often find themselves vulnerable when the landscape inevitably changes. But those who maintain their distinctiveness, who continue investing in their unique perspective and abilities, develop a resilience that transcends any particular environment. So, what can we take from all this? How do we apply Jeff Bezos' insight that differentiation is survival to our own pursuits? First, recognize that your environment is constantly pulling you toward conformity. This isn't necessarily malicious, it's just physics. Systems naturally move towards equilibrium. Resisting this pull requires conscious effort. Second, be intentional about the energy you expend to remain distinct. Don't just work hard, work on the things that others aren't willing or able to do. Find the dimensions where differentiation creates the most value. Third, build systems that actively resist becoming typical. At Amazon, this meant creating small, independent teams with just enough people to move fast and stay agile. For you, this might mean setting up daily habits, feedback loops, or creative limits that keep you from falling into routine. Fourth, accept that there will be costs. You will be misunderstood. You will face criticism, and you will experience failures that could have been avoided by following conventional wisdom. These aren't signs that you're doing something wrong. They're just the tax that you pay for being different. And finally, extend your time horizon. The longer your perspective, the easier it becomes to make decisions that set you apart. Most people won't sacrifice today for a payoff that's years or decades away. That alone can be a powerful form of differentiation. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to return to Bezos's fundamental insight. The universe wants you to be typical. This isn't pessimism, it's just physics. Entropy is real. The tendency toward mediocrity is real. But here's the thing. You get to decide whether to surrender to that pull or to fight against it. You get to choose whether the energy required for that differentiation is worth spending. For Bezos and Amazon, the answer was clear. For the visionaries we admire across the domains, from athletics to arts, science, entrepreneurship, the answer is clear. Differentiation isn't just about standing out, it's about survival. The question is, what will your answer be? That's all I got for you in today's episode of Made. If you found value in today's discussion, please just take a moment and share it with someone who's working to build something distinctive of their own. Anything you can do to share this podcast really, really does help this podcast grow, and I greatly appreciate it. Remember, the path to mastery is rarely clean or straightforward. It's built through grit, failure, and perseverance. Until next time, keep resisting equilibrium.